This morning, we are talking about reconnection through vulnerability. So I want to ask everyone in here something this morning. And that is, have you ever had somebody say something, say anything about you that simply or just wasn't true? I'm not talking about a misunderstanding. I'm not talking about somebody getting facts wrong. But I'm talking about someone that really misrepresented you. Saying things about you that make it sound like you're something that you're not. If you've lived long enough, you probably experienced that moment. That moment when someone questions your character. That moment when somebody questions your motive. Or that moment when somebody questions your integrity. And when that happens, I don't know about you, but in me, something rises up in me. My mind starts moving fast. Don't quote me on this, I'm not sure, but I can imagine that my heart rate picks up. And a familiar instinct begins to surface. And that instinct is, I have to protect myself. The instinct to defend my name. The instinct to fight back. You know, I had a moment like that in ministry where somebody said something about me that simply wasn't true. And it was when somebody told a family member that I was preaching false doctrine and leading people astray. When I heard it, I was hurt. And if I'm honest this morning, I was mad, I was angry. Because when people come for you like that, your mind starts to form an argument. And three thoughts ran through my head almost immediately. The first one was, I'm not going to let him say that about me. The second one was, man, I need to clear my name. And third, no, he is not going to lie on me. Has anybody in here ever had those thoughts before? Yeah. So you know the instinct is real. Because when you feel attacked, your instinct, your first instinct is to not be vulnerable. Your instinct is protection. Your instinct is to reach for the sword. Back to me in my situation. Instead of letting it go, I confronted the person. And the truth is, that decision fractured a relationship that will probably never be the same again. Looking back now, I can see something clearly that I couldn't see then. And that is, sometimes, the hardest thing in the world to do is to refuse to retaliate. So sometimes the hardest thing in the world to do is put the sword down. And that tension is exactly where our passage takes us today. Because in Matthew 26, Jesus is facing betrayal, he's facing accusation, and he's facing a violent crowd. And in that moment, somebody around him reached for a sword. But Jesus says something that reveals the way of the kingdom in that moment. In Matthew 26:52, he says, put your sword back in its place. In other words, for all my colored friends in here, put the sword down. You see, Pastor Kyle said it last week, and that is betrayal often or usually comes from somebody in your inner circle. Matthew tells us that when Judas arrived, he arrived with a crowd. He had soldiers with him. He had officials with him. He had people carrying swords and clubs. But Judas does something that makes this moment even more painful. He approaches Jesus with a kiss. You see, in that culture, a kiss was a sign of affection. A kiss was a sign of loyalty, a sign of closeness. But Judas takes something that is meant to communicate love, and he turns it into a signal for betrayal. Matthew, he includes that detail, I believe, because he wants us to see something. And I believe what he wants us to see is betrayal is barely random. It's barely random, and it's rarely random. And betrayal usually comes from someone close. It usually comes from someone who knows you. It usually comes from someone who walked with you. It usually comes from someone who sat at the table with you. You see, Judas wasn't an outsider. He was a disciple. He was a student of Jesus. He was Jesus' friend. And yet, Judas, he uses a kiss to betray the Son of God. And you see, when that happens, Jesus says something that I think is remarkable. In verse 50, he says, do what you came for, friend. Do what you came for, friend. Friend, Jesus referred to him as friend, not enemy, but a friend, not a traitor, but a friend. Because even in the moment of betrayal, Jesus refuses hatred. In the moment of betrayal, Jesus refuses retaliation. Even in the moment of betrayal, Jesus still speaks to Judas with dignity. And that moment reveals something about the heart of Jesus. And that is, even when we betray him, even when I betray him, he still calls me friend. And I believe now that the lesson is already beginning to show itself. Put the sword down. You see, because our first instinct, our instinct is always the sword. Matthew, he tells us that one of the disciples reaches for his weapon, he pulls out a sword and he swings it and he cuts off the servant ear. Now, if we were honest, that reaction feels pretty reasonable. Thank you, Charlie. After all, his teacher is being arrested. His leader is being attacked. His friend is being taken away. And instinct says you need to defend him. Does anybody else in here, other than Charlie, know what that instinct feels like? What it feels like when someone lies about you. What it feels like when someone attacks your character. What it feels like when someone comes for your reputation. Something in you says, I need to fight back. I need to correct the record. I need to protect myself. But Jesus, he interrupts the moment. And Jesus says something that changes the entire instinct. Matthew 26:52, he says, put your sword back in its place. Put the sword down. Because the dogma you live by is the dogma you'll die by. If you live by retaliation, retaliation will shape your life. If you live by anger, then anger will shape your relationships. If you live by violence, then violence will define your future. Jesus here, he's teaching us something about the kingdom. And that is the kingdom of God does not advance through retaliation. The kingdom of God does not advance through control. The kingdom of God does not advance through power. The kingdom of God advances through surrender. I know that may be a little hard for some of us to swallow because I'm still choking on it. But the kingdom of God advances through surrender. So Jesus says again, through his command, put the sword down. Let's be honest for a second. Let's be honest for a second. Some of us in here, I won't say who because I don't know. I just know about me. Some of us in here, or should I say me, I'm very good putting the sword down on Sunday morning. Yeah. I'm very good putting the sword down on Sunday morning when I have to come to church. But Lord have mercy, Monday is coming. And when Monday shows up, my sword comes right back out. You see, because some of us don't carry physical swords, but we carry some sharp words. Some of us don't carry physical swords, but we do carry some sharp text messages. Some of us don't carry physical swords, but we carry some sharp social media posts waiting for the right moment. Somebody talks about you and you already know exactly what you're going to say back. Premeditated. But Jesus, he interrupts that instinct. He says, put your sword back in its place. Put the sword down. You see, because Jesus chooses vulnerability. Jesus chooses vulnerability. Jesus says something else remarkable in Matthew 26:53. He says, do you think I cannot call on my Father and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? Now, if my math and history is correct, a Roman legion had about 6,000 soldiers. And y'all forgive me, I went to Oakland Public Schools. But Jesus is saying that he can call more than 70,000 angels. Did I get it right? Yeah, 70,000 angels. That's not weakness. That's restrained power. That's choosing to be vulnerable. And Jesus is not vulnerable because he's powerless. Jesus is vulnerable, watch this, because he chooses obedience. Jesus allows himself to be arrested because the scriptures must be fulfilled. The hour has come, the cross is ahead, and the disciples still don't understand. So what do? Verse 56 says, all the disciples deserted him and fled. Everybody runs, everybody leaves, everybody disappears. And Jesus is left there standing alone. And he's standing alone because the cross is only his to bear. And he bears it so that reconnection with God can become possible. And let me encourage somebody right here. The disciples ran, but Jesus didn't quit on them. Peter ran, but Jesus restored him. Thomas doubted, but Jesus met him. The disciples all failed, but Jesus kept on calling them. And that ought to encourage you today, because some of us knows what it's like when we fail Jesus. But the good news of the gospel is this: Jesus does not give up on us. Somebody may be wondering why this matters. It matters because people today are still reaching for swords. No, not literal swords, but modern ones. We protect our image. We protect our pride. We protect our reputation. And we do that because somewhere along the way, we were taught the survival rule. We were taught never to be vulnerable. We were taught to always fight back. We were taught to always protect yourself. We were taught, make sure that nobody gets the last word. And if I'm honest, that's exactly what I did in my situation. I reached for the sword. But Jesus shows us another way. And that way is to put the sword down. Here's the beauty of this passage. Jesus put the sword down, or Jesus chose vulnerability so he could go to the cross. And at the cross, he carried our sin. At the cross, he carried our pride. At the cross, he carried our retaliation. At the cross, he carried our violence. And Jesus, he died a death that we deserve. He was buried in a borrowed tomb, but 3 days later, God raised him from the dead. And because of that resurrection, reconciliation with God is made possible. And that reconciliation begins with surrender. Because reconnection with God begins when we stop protecting ourselves and watch this, we trust God enough to be vulnerable. So here's the question this morning. Where are you still holding on to the sword? What relationship are you protecting your pride in? What wounds are you refusing to release? What argument are you still holding on to? Jesus' invitation is simple. Put your sword back in its place. Put it down. Put it down. And trust God enough to be vulnerable. Because sometimes the greatest strength in the kingdom of God is the courage to surrender. Put the sword down.